5,000 years ago, a great civilization known as the Minoans flourished on the island of Crete. Centuries before the Greeks built the Parthenon, Minoan artists recorded their achievements through exquisite carving and stunning frescoes. They were the first Europeans to use writing. But at the height of their powers, they were wiped from the pages of history. Their disappearance is still one of the ancient world's greatest mysteries. Some thought the Minoans were slaughtered by conquerors from overseas. Others, that a cataclysmic eruption destroyed them. Now, a team of scientists, each with their own specialist skill, have joined forces to solve the puzzle. They are finding new evidence of a dreadful disaster that overwhelmed Europe's first civilization.
You spend a lot of time looking for something, and then when you find it, you wish you hadn't.
Did their terrible fate create the myth of Atlantis, the city that drowned?
They worship the sea, and here is the sea that's turning against them.
More than 2,000 years ago, the Greek historian Plato wrote about Atlantis, the fabulous civilization that was swallowed by the sea. But no one has been able to trace the origins of Plato's story. Now, new evidence from the island of Crete has led some archaeologists to speculate that the Atlantis legend was created here. Was the destruction of Atlantis a folk memory of what happened to the Minoans who flourished on Crete 2,000 years before Plato? Until the 20th century, the Minoans were a mysterious people, known only from Greek myths about monsters and human sacrifice. Archaeologist Sandy McGillivray has been studying Minoan culture on Crete for 25 years. He's on a quest to discover the fate of Europe's first civilization. Sandy is on his way to explore ancient mines in the center of the island. For hundreds of years, they were thought to be the labyrinth, the home of the legendary Minotaur. Greek myths described the creature as half bull and half man. It was imprisoned in the Great Maze by King Minos, and it fed on human flesh.
There were all kinds of stories of hauntings and weird happenings in here. It's still a place associated with doom and death.
The Minotaur had very particular tastes. It liked to consume its human prey alive.
To keep the Minotaur fed, Minos exacted a tribute of 7 maids and 7 youths from the Athenians. And once you entered the labyrinth, you never left the labyrinth.
The myth suggests that the Minoans practiced human sacrifice and were perhaps even cannibals. But was this simply propaganda generated by Greek fears of a powerful people? The Minotaur myth was virtually all we knew about this lost people until 1900. Then, British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans began excavating on Crete, near the village of Knossos. What he found astonished the world. He uncovered a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization. Whilst the ancient Greeks were living as barbarian warriors, these people were building palaces. The Minoans' capital was a masterpiece of prehistoric town planning. Its temples, townhouses, and granaries were connected by Europe's first paved roads. Then, archaeologists discovered Minoan settlements throughout Crete and beyond. The Minoans had colonized other Aegean islands and parts of mainland Turkey. Minoan pottery and artifacts carried by their ships have been found from Spain to Mesopotamia. Their maritime empire was so vast, it even rivaled the ancient Egyptians. The Minoans were also skilled craftsmen, capable of producing exquisite treasures. The artist who carved this tiny seal must have used magnifying lenses, their first recorded use in Europe. This molding is just 2 centimeters high, but within it is a portrait of a whole Minoan town. Another masterpiece is the harvester vase.
You've got a little choir of men with skull caps on whose mouths are open. The wreaths that some of them are holding, you can almost hear them blowing in the wind, rustling against each other. These pieces are symphonic in every way. It's a revolution in art.
As Sir Arthur Evans excavated the magnificent ruins at Knossos, he grew more certain that this was the palace of King Minos and home of the legendary labyrinth. He even believed he'd found the royal throne. But new revelations about Minoan religion and language are transforming our understanding of these people. Modern archaeologists believe these buildings are not a labyrinth or even a palace. Instead, they see a temple to harness the magical powers of the heavens. In 2001, Sandy McGillivray realized that each of these doorways is aligned with the rising sun on key days in the calendar.
What we're looking at here is the solar temple.
Like the Egyptians, the Minoans worshipped the changing cycles of the sun, the moon, and the stars.
What we have here then is essentially a theater of the senses. You can start off with complete blackness, and then you can fling open these doors at that moment of sunrise and experience that beginning of something new. And in the winter, the sun comes through on the winter solstice and illuminates the throne.
But the throne was not the seat of a king. Instead, McGillivray believes that a high priestess sat here to celebrate the rebirth of the sun and reforge the Minoan bond with nature.
Whoever's on that throne is basically being illuminated by the sun on the day when the sun is reborn.
Female figurines found at Knossos suggest a cult of snake priestesses, reinforcing the idea that this was a temple. Revelations about Minoan religion and culture have been matched by a breakthrough in decoding the mysterious Minoan script, known as Linear A. Sandy McGillivray sees it as the key to understanding who the Minoans really were.
A decipherment for Linear A has given us a language for this Cretan civilization, which is akin to the early language of Iran, which found its way from the highlands of Iran all the way to India on one side and to Minoan Crete on the other side.
Could this explain why these people were so different from the ancient Greeks who succeeded them? Their language and religion were more Asian than European. But despite their power and their remarkable achievements 3,500 years ago, the Minoans disappeared. Their fate is still a mystery. Were they wiped out by ancient Greek invaders, described by Homer in his epic poems about the Trojan War? Or was it a catastrophic natural event, like the one that supposedly destroyed Atlantis? The island of Santorini, less than 70 miles north of Knossos, may provide a clue to solving the Minoan mystery. The wild scenery and jagged cliffs draw countless tourists, but they don't realize that this is a highly explosive volcano. Nor did a colony of Minoans who lived on Santorini 3,500 years ago. Their town of Akrotiri was discovered here in 1967, buried on the slopes of the vast crater. It was in its day as wealthy and self-assured as the settlements on Crete. Floyd McCoy has been studying the volcano on Santorini for 25 years.
If you take a look at the wall paintings that have been discovered here, they are portraying their landscape. It's a happy landscape, animals bouncing around and people picking saffron.
Throughout the classical world, saffron was valued not just as a spice, but as a medicine. More than 3,500 years ago, the Minoans living on Santorini recorded how they harvested it.
They were showing a nice lifestyle, a comfortable one. It's a pity it was all destroyed.
The Minoans had built their beautiful city on the most dangerous island on Earth. Around 1600 BC, Akrotiri was shaken by a violent earthquake. But this was just the beginning.
And suddenly, this thing exploded.
Thera was erupting. The vast volcano blasted ash, gas, and rock up to 25 miles into the stratosphere. Evidence of the volcano's power is all around Santorini, in deposits that are more than 60 meters deep in places.
There, in that cliff face, all 4 layers representing the 4 major phases of this huge, dramatic eruption. The first layer that we see is that brown layer at the bottom, that granular brown layer. That's pumice. Pumice is frothy rock. It represents magma frozen in place, a frozen explosion.
But it's the layer on top of this pumice that demonstrates the real power of this mighty eruption. This is the ash left by pyroclastic flows.
Pyroclastic flows, hot gas material that comes up and flows laterally across the landscape, sometimes at supersonic speeds, hot gases.
These gases were forced out by massive explosions in the heart of the volcano, the caldera. But what caused these blasts? When the magma first erupted out of Thera, it left behind a huge empty chamber. The surface above the chamber collapsed, creating a vast cavity. Then the sea rushed in.
Magma and water do not mix. They make an explosion. The entire Aegean Sea is pouring into this vent, mixing with new magma coming up, and the explosion was tremendous, huge. And from that come these pyroclastic flows.
But the third layer best demonstrates the awesome force of this eruption. This 10-meter deposit of ash was left by a single monstrous pyroclastic flow. And on top lies a final 4th layer.
It started to rain. torrential rains came down. And then all this loose ash and pumice on the surface started to move down slope. That's what we call debris flows. And then it was over.
Was the Thera eruption powerful enough to have destroyed the Minoans on Crete? In the 1980s, Floyd and his colleagues found ash deposits on neighboring islands and on the seabed near Crete.
We calculated the amount, the volume of this material, which is how we figure out how explosive an eruption was. It came out something like Krakatoa. Wow, we said.
When Krakatoa, the volcanic island that lies between Java and Sumatra, erupted in 1883, the explosion was heard 2,000 miles away, and the disaster claimed 36,000 lives. Then, more evidence of Thera's deadly deposits began to emerge not just from the Mediterranean, but as far as the Black Sea. Computer modeling expert and volcano enthusiast Dr. Stuart Dunn decided to plot the results.
We put together a database of all these ash thicknesses, recording their locations and recording the thickness in centimeters.
Each numbered triangle represents a deposit of ash from Thera. The location and thickness of these residues allow Dunn to calculate how many millions of tons of material were blasted across the region.
We concluded that the eruption was very, very much larger than had been previously thought.
We were all wrong. This was highly explosive. Now we're up to 10 times the explosivity of Krakatoa.
We really are talking about the largest volcanic event in human history in Europe.
What was the impact of this terrifying event on the Minoans? The volcano spewed out huge plumes of ash. When the dense clouds appeared, it must have seemed to the Minoans on Crete that nature had turned against them.
Imagine this ash coming over the island, and we know it happened. It blackened the air, it blackened the blue sky for several days probably, and that is pretty bad for people living with nature. We have evidence from other societies where they really get stressed, traumatic stress, because of this ashfall.
Until recently, many archaeologists believed that ash from Thera suffocated the entire island. But Dunn's computer model shows that only the eastern part of Crete received a significant covering. The west was virtually untouched. Prevailing winds blew most of the ash clouds away. But if the ash didn't cause the Minoans' downfall, what did? Archaeologist Sandy McGillivray has been grappling with this question for the last 20 years. He's been excavating the Minoan coastal town of Palais-Castro on eastern Crete. The extent of the ruins found here suggests that this was the largest Minoan settlement after Knossos, home to 5,000 people, stretching from the mountainside to the sea. Paved roads with drains were laid out on a grid pattern in Europe's first town plan. Palais-Castro's extensive workshops produced everything from basic foodstuffs to some of the finest art yet discovered on Crete. This remarkable statue was found in the town in 1987. Today, the small hill the town stood on at the water's edge is eroding into the sea, revealing a strange layer of chaotically mixed material.
I used to come down here to the beach and I would see these gravel deposits. We had Theran ash, we had pottery, and there was building debris, there was all this chaos, and brought a number of specialists up here and said, well, you know, can you explain how this gravel got up here? And one of them suggested that there was a river flowing up here, and I thought, a river? How, you know, why would a Minoan build their house in the middle of a river, and how could a river run over a hilltop? That made no sense whatsoever to me. And I thought, let's get people to really investigate this properly.
Sandy had never seen anything like it before. So he called in Hendrik Bruins, soil scientist from Ben Gurion University, Israel. Hendrik specializes in identifying and dating unusual layers like this.
Look here, we have stone, pottery, and lots of lumps of volcanic ash. This is one lump, this is another lump.
But even he is surprised by these strange and rare deposits.
This is, from a sedimentary point of view, this is impossible to get, let's say, by an earthquake, and it's impossible to get by natural archaeological stratification.
But what caused this chaotic deposit? Hendrik takes samples to see if they contain microscopic clues which might reveal how the layer was formed.
So this is the hardened block made from the sediment which we took in situ at the promontory, the soft brittle material, hardened afterwards. Here we have the slide, the thin section that was made from the block.
Under the microscope, an astonishing find.
We were really very, very thrilled when we saw foraminifera in these deposits.
Foraminifera are the shells of tiny organisms only found beneath the sea. It suggests that the deposit is from the ocean. Perhaps a bad storm could have blown the foraminifera onto land. But there is another marine creature within the soil sample. Coralline algae from the seabed.
These come from below the sea level, and in order to deposit them in that level where we found them at a promontory, I mean, it has to be scooped up by something. It has to be lifted up to a much higher level where the sea normally never comes.
No storm could have lifted algae from the seabed and left it stranded 5 meters up on the island. But there is an awesome natural force that has the power to do this. In 2004, the world was shocked by the force of the Asian tsunami, the monstrous wave generated by a subsea earthquake. It killed 230,000 people and devastated entire coastlines. Could this have happened to the Minoans 3,500 years ago? Is the Palecastro beach deposit the terrifying footprint of a tsunami?
Here you can see bits of paving.
Sandy calls in leading tsunami expert Kostas Sinolakis for a second opinion. Kostas has studied tsunami deposits from the 2004 wave and other smaller waves all around the world. As soon as they reach the beach, they find newly exposed Minoan pottery fragments mixed in with the gravel.
These are cattle bones here. You can see floor plaster and wall plaster. You can see building material, and you see a lot of typical pottery. Okay, have a look at this deposit here, Kostas. There's the conical cup sitting right there. It's 5 meters above Minoan sea level.
When Sandy invited me to come out here and look at some of the evidence, I was very skeptical. But nonetheless, I was really keen to see what Sandy had. Sandy, I mean, if this is all the Minoan deposit, it must have been something really massive. I mean, something of the scale that we have just not even started thinking about. What happened here?
Now they explore the excavated part of the Minoan town of Palacastro, 300 meters from the beach. Here, there is further evidence that something extraordinary happened. The buildings show unusual signs of damage.
We find some walls entirely missing. We find...
Entirely missing?
Yeah, like the late Minoan, one wall along the bottom there is gone. That half of the building is gone.
And of course, this is what we see, in modern tsunamis. We call this the blowout. The sea comes in, tsunami comes in, blows out the walls. If the building is strong enough, the side walls, will survive. But the walls facing the ocean, they're just going to collapse.
All of a sudden, a lot of deposits began making sense to us because we had these buildings pulled away, we had the fronts of buildings missing, we had buildings raised right down to foundation level.
What kind of wave was powerful enough to cross 300 meters of land before demolishing a town? To find out, Costas must create a computer model. The first step is to build a three-dimensional map of the bay, starting with the seafloor. He uses sonar to plot its contours. The shape of the seabed would have influenced the velocity of the wave as it approached the land. Costas also wants to find more traces of the wave's terrible progress further inland. The next day, they begin their search for traces of the sea's dramatic invasion of the Minoan heartland. First stop is a new road cutting, nearly 1 kilometer from the shore.
That's a seashell. That's outrageous.
I don't believe this. It's all exposed. And, look, there's more.
That looks to me like the rim of a hemispherical cup, the period of theory eruption.
The cutting isn't just a kilometer inland. It's well above sea level.
It looks like we're at 31.36 meters. Hard to believe. It's just...
That's about right. We're cooking.
All you.
We are cooking.
But could a tsunami really have reached this far? Environmental scientist Anaya Sarpaki has kept soil samples from excavations in ancient Palacastro for the last 20 years. Do they contain the telltale microscopic signs of marine life?
In this particular sample, we have found raminifera.
Oh my goodness. Is that what they look like?
Mm-hmm.
It's the evidence they have been looking for, that the tsunami deluged the town of Palacastro.
What Anaya has found is extremely exciting. Anaya's foraminifera, the wall, and then the debris layer, well, there's no other alternative explanation that can simultaneously explain all these findings other than the fact that the tsunami was really big, much bigger than we thought. Came through, destroyed the town, and pretty much covered most of the plain behind me.
So what caused the wave that destroyed Palacastro? Was it a subsea earthquake, or was it the eruption on Thera? Hendrik Bruins hopes a fragment of cattle bone buried in the tsunami deposit will confirm the link between the wave and the volcano.
What I would like to see, if possible, that the bone would give a date, a radiocarbon date, that is similar to the date for the Minoan Santorini eruption, because then we have very, very hard scientific evidence that we're talking about the same time, also in radiocarbon time. So if this radiocarbon date that comes from this bone would be similar to the radiocarbon date of the Santorini eruption, then it's very, very important scientific evidence. That's one piece.
Did the greatest volcanic eruption in human history generate a tsunami powerful enough to destroy not only a single town, but to ravage an entire civilization?
There we are.
Could this bone hold the key to the story of Atlantis, the great city that disappeared beneath the waves? The team continue their hunt for more evidence of the tsunami across the island. They search along the north coast, where any tsunami generated by Thera would have struck. But centuries of erosion by wind and sea make evidence on the ground elusive. 50 kilometers west, along the coast from Palacastro, lies Malia. These ruins were once the third largest Minoan palace on Crete. Coastal towns like Malia had no protective walls. Minoan defences rested on their control of the sea as the leading naval power in the ancient world. Close by the ruins, the team find the same layer of smashed pottery and building debris that they saw at Palacastro. But buried in it is further evidence that a giant wave may have dumped marine life onto the land.
Wow, look at that.
Very good.
Very good, very good. So this strengthens our working hypothesis that this is a tsunami deposit.
The significance of it, at least to me, is that it adds tremendous credibility to the deposits that we have found in Palacastro, right out there in the promontory. It's much more useful to us to have two deposits that are at the distance of 20 miles apart from each other, 30 miles apart, than having two deposits that are next to each other, because then we have a better geographical constraint, and that helps us identify how wide the wave is. What was the width of the wall of water that came towards Crete?
Now the team know the wave was at least 30 miles wide. But could it have been even bigger? The next day, they reach Amnisos, the port of the Minoan fleet, and close to the palace of Knossos. 4,000 years ago, a villa nestled among olive groves on this idyllic coast. It was once decorated with frescoes that celebrated the Minoan love of nature. But about the time of the eruption of Thera, the villa was destroyed and the fresco torn from the walls. Pumice from Thera was once found in the ruins of this Minoan villa. The petrified volcanic froth might have been brought in by a storm. But if they can find Theran pumice higher in the hills behind the villa, it might suggest it floated in on a massive tsunami.
Well, if we can find some pumice up here.
Put your eyes where your mouth is.
Let's try to find.
Let's try to find some pumice.
They're searching at 20 meters above sea level.
This is it. That obviously is volcanic. See if it sparkles.
But it's rounded. Yeah, this is absolutely pumice. There's no doubt about it.
Do you realize what this means for the height of the tsunami?
Okay, is there any other way that these little tiny pieces of pumice got up here? How else could the pumice get here? It's not a souvenir.
You could get destruction down there, with a wave that's maybe, 3 meters high. Who knows how strong the house was. But finding pumice, up here, is unbelievable. This is huge.
As a child, there was a big anthill at one end of the garden, and we used to go with the garden hose and wash them off. And that keeps coming back somewhere in my memory. And I keep thinking that wave had an effect like just washing ants off an anthill and sweeping them out to sea. It's a terrifying thing. Those ants never had a chance.
With evidence accumulating for an island-wide tsunami, Hendrik is keen to establish the cause of this giant killer wave. He's been waiting for the radiocarbon date of the cattle bone he found on the beach. Will it confirm the team's theory that the volcano generated the tsunami? The results arrive. The date is 1600 BC, an exact match of the definitive date for the Thera eruption.
The cattle bones, they are of the same age as the Santorini eruption, and it proves that also our chaotic tsunami deposit has also in radiocarbon terms the same age as the Santorini eruption, which is superb.
The team are now certain what caused the wave, but just how big was it? And what damage could it have done? At the lab, Kostas can finally produce his detailed computer model of the height, length and width of the wave.
Yes. We've created the monster.
The red and green peaks show the highest points of the tsunami.
The size of the wave here, so just to give you a comparison, is equivalent to what the wave looked like off Sri Lanka and off Thailand. And you know how many people died in Thailand, how many people died in Sri Lanka. Thailand reached 20 meters. It's the same size wave right here.
20 meters.
But the real shock isn't just the size of the tsunami. It's the realization that there were several of them.
It's having a party.
When the caldera collapsed, it sent several walls of water out into the Aegean, like a pebble dropping into a pond. These waves cannoned around the islands and bounced off them in a deadly game of tsunami pinball.
Wow,
it's coming in. It's now, yeah.
Crete was hit by several rebounding waves.
What are the intervals between
these,
with this wave traffic? What are the intervals
let's have a look
in between?
How this is about 33 minutes. And now we have
the first wave coming in.
And now you have the second one, and that's at 46 minutes. And then you have another wave in about half an hour later, which is not as big, but it has to be terrifying because by that time, everything, the people have run away. Maybe some people are coming back to help, the wounded. They try to find, family members, and then this, other wave comes in and sort of finishes the job.
This is horrifying.
Yeah,
it's absolutely horrifying. And my reaction to seeing that model was a bit like watching 9/11. Because I hate disasters. It's like time looking for something, and then when you find it, you wish you hadn't. Because it becomes too real. And you can, you begin to feel the experience. This is life, this is people just being washed out to sea, bashed around, knocked against walls, ships coming ashore. There's a whole instant that flashes through your head.
striking observation that I've made just talking to people, all over the world. I mean, when it comes to tsunamis, whether it is, Nicaragua, or whether it is Sri Lanka, or whether, it is in the Philippines, they tell you about the noise. Tsunami comes in and, they tell you that it sounds like, some people say, like falling rain. Others tell you that, it's like an airplane landing. This impression, what you hear time and time again, irrespective of where you are, the feeling is that this is the end of the world. Once a tsunami starts climbing up on dry land, it's moving at the speed of maybe anywhere between 10 to 20 miles per hour. It's almost like being in a 20,000 mile per hour wind. Nothing can stop it. It's not even a question of being scared. The moment that you see the tsunami, most people freeze. I'm trying to think, how would the Minoan have reacted to this phenomenon, which is, these people loved the sea. They worshipped the sea, and here is the sea that's turning against them. Once they come up on the hill and they look back and they look at the destruction, how can they ever go back and live in the same place? It's probably cursed.
There's no written record of a Theran tsunami, no figures for the death and destruction that it caused, but the 2004 tsunami offers a chilling parallel.
The Minoans, they're so confident in their navy that they're living in unprotected cities all along the coastline. These were the major population centers. That's where people are living. Now you go to Banda Aceh, and you find that the mortality rate is 80%. If we're looking at a similar mortality rate in late Minoan 1A Thera eruption period Crete, that's the end of the Minoans.
The tsunami was enough to bring a great civilization to its knees. But there were survivors. Knossos, the Minoan capital, was too far inland to be destroyed. The Minoans stumbled on, even rebuilding in places. And although they never regained their full power and influence, they could still create exquisite works of art.
He's made of ivory tusks, gold. He has a serpentinite head, and he is one of the great masterpieces of Minoan art. His cuticles are even carved. He's given pulsating veins. The sculptor wanted him to be alive.
But the statue also bears the scars of a troubled island. He was smashed and burned with intense ferocity. He was found shattered into hundreds of pieces both inside and outside the shrine that housed him.
This was a valuable piece. Anybody who had this in his possession would have been rich, but they did not care. They wanted to destroy the statue somebody picked up the statue from its base and brought it outside. He took the statue and smashed the face into probably this side of the wall and made the stone hair fall and have the torso and the arms drop in front of the steps of the shrine and threw in the legs in the burning house.
Is this graphic evidence of a society in meltdown? Did the poor rebel against their rulers and overthrow the gods that had failed to protect them?
They really went for the face. And so we see that in all different kinds of civilizations, Egyptian or Roman, when they go for the face, there is something symbolic involved. They want to destroy everything this statue stood for.
Was the fate of the statue connected to an outburst of destruction that overtook the Minoans in around 1450 BC? In Hanya, in western Crete, an excavation in the heart of the modern town has revealed evidence of arson.
These are the stones that are in such a condition because of the strong fire.
It's a pattern repeated in other sites across the island. Was this a revolution within Minoan society, or is it evidence of conquest by outsiders? Archaeologist Maria Vlasaki believes she's found the answer. She's discovered a highly unusual cemetery in Hanya. It dates from the same period as the widespread destruction in the Minoan world.
These are warrior graves. They are single burials, something that is in opposition with the traditional Cretan Minoan customs. They have the age of between 24 to 30. They are tall, robust. They look to be invaders.
These invaders have only ever been found once before on Crete, at Knossos. But now we have evidence of them elsewhere. It suggests an invasion from the west, from the mainland of Greece.
They have a lot of weapons, long swords like the ones that are in Knossos and in Peloponnese.
The invaders from the Peloponnese slashed and burned their way across Crete, overwhelming the Minoans. Sandy McGillivray believes that the tsunami may have helped the Mycenaeans attack Crete.
Their traditional homeland is on the southern shores of the Gulf of Corinth. Tsunami cannot get into the Gulf of Corinth. To get into there, you have to go all the way around to the west through a little narrow opening. So the Mycenaean Greeks up there are probably the only people left, maybe even in the eastern Mediterranean, with a navy. This is power.
Did these Greek invaders encounter a dark side of Minoan culture? Close by the great bull frescoes in Knossos, archaeologists have found grisly human remains.
One of the most telling and horrifying deposits from the post-Theron eruption period in Crete was a deposit recovered in the town of Knossos, up along the Royal Road, and that was these cannibalized youths. The analysis of these bones from this burnt destruction deposit strongly suggested that they'd been hacked up in order to take the flesh off, in order to eat them. This cannibalistic aspect of the Minoans is probably one of the things that was recalled when the Greeks first arrived in Crete. Fear and loathing at Knossos.
Was this the origin of the Minotaur myth? Did the Greeks imagine that these unlucky victims had been led into the labyrinth to be sacrificed to the Minoan bull god? Within a generation of their arrival, the Greeks had conquered Crete. The last embers of Minoan culture flickered out. These pioneering archaeologists have finally unraveled the mystery of how the first great European culture disintegrated at the peak of its power.
This is a major discovery now, because what it's doing is it's helping us to rewrite a chapter in Minoan archaeology, in the history of the Minoans.
This is absolutely exciting. I mean, it's just, even in my wildest dream, when I started becoming, or thinking becoming a scientist, did I ever think that I would be working on understanding the demise of the Minoans and what happened back then in the 2nd millennium BC.
This may be as close as we will ever come to finding the source of Plato's tantalizing story of Atlantis. Perhaps he was recording the distant memory of the great Minoan civilization, shattered by this ancient tsunami.